Now let's create some animation. So far we haven't actually created any motion. The way we do that is by setting keyframes. Keyframes are a way for you to lock in a particular property value at a particular point in time. Then you can move your time indicator down in the timeline and change that property, and After Effects is going to create animation. It's going to interpolate between the two keyframes that you created. So let's get started. So we'll start with position. That's the easiest to understand. And the way we actually create animation, by default, if I position the spaceship up here, let's say, then I scrub my time indicator through the timeline, there's no motion. It's just sitting wherever I put it. So if you change a property without a keyframe, it just changes that property for the entire duration of the timeline. To create animation, you have to create a keyframe. So for position, I'll come over here and notice these properties all have this little stopwatch icon to the left of them. By clicking the stopwatch next to position, I'm basically turning on animation for the position property. And notice After Effects created the first keyframe for me. That's what this little yellow diamond is here. That's a keyframe. So what I've done is I've locked in this particular position property at 0 time code. So now I can move down in my timeline, let's say to 1 second, and I can change the position. So I'll grab my little spaceship and move it down here, and notice After Effects automatically created that second keyframe for me. All I had to do is move the layer, and so now I have a keyframe at 1 second that's locking in this position. So what After Effects does for all the frames between these two keyframes, After Effects is going to interpolate the position of the layer between these two keyframes. So if I scrub through my timeline now back and forth, you can see my layer is actually moving now. We've created animation. When you set 2 or more position keyframes, you get this thing. This is called the motion path. The big squares represent your keyframes. These little dots along the motion path, these represent the individual frames of video between these two keyframes. So for example, these keyframes are at 0 and at 1 second. We know video is 30 frames a second. The frame rate of this composition is 30 frames a second. So that means, counting our keyframes, there's 30 dots along this line. So what that lets you do is it lets you estimate how fast this layer is moving just based on the distance between the little dots along the motion path, right? So you can see if I grab this, if I select the second keyframe down here in the timeline and drag it to the right, and if you look in the comp window, you can see those little dots getting closer and closer and closer together. I've dragged the keyframe down to 4 seconds now, so I've given it a lot more time to do the same move. There's a lot more frames between my two keyframes, so the layer is going to be moving much slower. If I drag that keyframe to the left, notice how the dots get further apart, indicating that the spaceman is moving a much greater distance between each frame, so he's moving much faster. So let's put this back at 1 second. Here's another thing I should show you. If you have your I placed my time indicator on 1 second, and if I'm dragging a keyframe, I can hold the shift key and it will snap to my time indicator. So that lets me get my keyframes positioned precisely where I want them, frame accurate. Okay, so we've created this very simple position animation. Now I want to see what I'm scrubbing it here, and we're seeing it play back at the speed that I'm scrubbing it, right? But I want to see what is the actual timing of this move. In order to see that, we need to render a RAM preview. So I mentioned earlier how we can hit the RAM preview button up here. And down here in our timeline, we can see our little time indicator playing back. When it gets to the end of the comp, it's going to loop again because I have it set to loop in the preview window. But our move only takes 1 second. We don't need to preview all this, the full 10 seconds of our composition. We're sitting around for 8 seconds waiting for it to loop back so we can see the motion again. So what we want to do is use this gray bar at the top of the timeline. This is called the work area. And I can grab this little tab, this is the out point for the work area. I can drag it to the left. If you click in the middle of the work area, you can drag the work area around in the composition. If I drag the first little yellow tab, that lets me trim the end point of the work area. So with the work area, we can select just the section of the timeline that we want to RAM preview. So I have just over a second selected with the work area. Now when I hit the RAM preview, it's only going to render those frames. It's only going to preview those frames. So now I can watch it play back. I can see up here that the info palette's telling me it's playing at real time, so I can make some accurate decisions now about the timing of this. I can decide whether it's moving too slow or too fast. This is exactly what it's going to look like when the finished rendered movie plays back. I also have a little bit of control over how After Effects interpolates the layer from between the two keyframes. And we can do that. Sometimes they're hard to see, but see this little bit larger dot? That's actually a Bezier handle. If I click and drag it, you can see that I'm now changing the spatial interpolation of the layer between the two keyframes. So you don't want to use too many keyframes. With just 2 keyframes, you can create a nice S-curve motion. I'll render RAM preview so you can see what that looks like. So use the Bezier handles to control the spatial interpolation of your keyframes on a motion path. Okay, so that's how you create position animation. Before we move on, I want to show you one more thing. We've manipulated the spatial interpolation by tweaking these Bezier handles. We can also manipulate the temporal interpolation, which is how the layer moves through time, or basically the timing of the layer. Right now you can see all the little dots are equally spaced apart, right? Which means that this layer is moving at a constant velocity. It starts out at a constant speed and continues at that speed until it comes to a stop, which is not how things behave in nature, right? If I render RAM preview, you can see how the spaceship suddenly comes to a stop. Well, in the real world, things have to decelerate to a stop, right? They can't just come immediately to a stop. Unless there's a specific reason that you need the timing to be linear like this. Typically, when things animate on screen and come to a stop, you'd want them to decelerate, to gradually slow down to a stop. And here's how we're going to do that. We'll select this second keyframe where he comes to a landing, right? And we can go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. Notice the keyboard shortcut is F9. You'll be using Easy Ease a lot, so you may want to remember that one. You can also right-click on the keyframe and go to Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And notice if we zoom in here, and I'll scrub so the little guy's out of the way. But now if we look at the little dots along the timeline, you can see how as the motion path approaches this keyframe, the little dots are getting closer and closer and closer together. Alright, so that's indicating that the layer is slowing down. The distance between each frame is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So if we render a RAM preview now, you should see him. See how he softly came to a stop? He decelerated to a stop.